Reform have announced their candidate for the Gorton and Denton by-election, author, GB News host and right-wing commentator Matt Goodwin. I will be standing for Reform UK in the Gorton and Denton by-election on February the 26th. This election is a referendum on Keir Starmer as Prime Minister. If you want him out, vote Reform. Now, this is a by-election, right? This is about a local constituency voting on stuff or voting for a particular person. And he's saying this is a referendum on Keir Starmer because Reform, all they have is national politics. That's the only thing going for them. I mean, the guy's from London. He's not from Manchester. It says it already, doesn't it? Now, the top three parties in the race are, of course, Labour, Reform and the Greens. Labour haven't announced their candidates and the Greens will be unveiling theirs on Friday. Hannah Spencer has been tipped to be the one selected. She is local. Co-deputy leader Mohsin Ali is running to be the candidate too. And whilst he isn't local to the area, he lives in the neighbouring city of Leeds, of course, the place that I live. Goodwin, however, as I said, is born in London. He has no connection to Manchester and is the epitome of a parachuted candidate. Now, Goodwin may be known today as a host on GB News, but he has been around for a while, pushing very right-wing politics. Notably, Goodwin used racist rhetoric after the horrific murders in Southport. This is Novara Media's Ash Sarkar grilling him on the BBC back in 2024.
Hey, Matt. Quick question. Do you think I'm English?
Yes, I don't see the relevance of that question. I think, as Tim said in his opening remarks, there's a tendency to reduce this debate to questions that might have been relevant many years ago, but are less relevant today. The vast majority of people in this country do not view their Englishness or Britishness through a racial lens.
I'm glad you said that, because I'd like to quote from one of your recent blog posts written after the dreadful stabbings in Southport. You wrote this: "These poor children thought they were going to a Taylor Swift-themed dance class. They ended up being murdered. And who murdered them? The son of immigrants from Rwanda." And I suppose my question for you is, why does it matter that the suspect is the son of immigrants if he was born in Cardiff, right? I was born in England. You consider me English. Do you not consider him Welsh?
Well, that was on my Substack, and the reason that I wrote that was because I was trying to make the point that we have a massive problem in this country with integration. We have a massive problem with absorbing millions of people who have come into Britain, principally over the last quarter century. And we can see that. It's instantly obvious to anybody who lives outside of the M25, lots of people in London too, that what we have essentially done is pursued a model that has prioritised group difference and, particularly on the left of politics, I would argue, has allowed minorities to celebrate their distinctive identity, culture, history, but has not allowed the majority to do the same.
But you are the person singling out his difference, that he's the child of immigrants from Rwanda. The point I'm making is that if he's as British, quite frankly, as me or you, why are you emphasising that point of difference?
Well, you didn't go to a dance class and murder children and commit crime, etc. And I think in this particular
And you're saying that's because of his culture, even though we don't know that? I'm
saying that in the context of everything that's happened in this country in recent years, from British Muslims blowing up children at pop concerts, or people from minority backgrounds, recent illegal migrants, asylum seekers committing sexual assaults and rapes and so forth, to what we've seen in 7/7, etc., over the last 20 years, it's very obvious, I think, to lots of people in this country that the model of multiculturalism, which I think we first had an interesting debate about it in 2001 around community cohesion and Ted Cantle. We then had a debate about it with Trevor Phillips, so we sleepwalking to segregation. We then had another debate about it in 2011 with the England riots. We haven't answered this question. How are we going to build an integrated society? Imposing mass immigration on this country while thinking that we can integrate this country at the same time is not a serious answer to that problem.
Well, look, I think when it comes to connecting the race riots that we've been witnessing and the tenor of the conversation around immigration, for me, that's undeniable. Of course, me and Matt Goodwin would differ an awful lot on whether immigration is a good thing and how it ought to be handled. But I think I would just like to draw your attention to an element of our back and forth, because what happened in Southport specifically is being assigned by Goodwin as a problem of integration. Why is he assigning it as a problem of integration? We don't know what this attacker's motivations were. That information has not been made available to us. We don't know if it was mental health issues. We don't know if it was ideological. We simply don't know. The reason why it's being assigned that meaning is because this suspect is the child of Rwandan immigrants. So if you say that when a child of immigrants, and in particular a black or an Asian child of immigrants, when they commit a crime, it's because of a problem of integration. And you can always say that simply because of where they come from. Would we not call that racist? Because I think that would meet anyone's definition of it.
You've got to admit, Ash Sarkar absolutely bodied Matt Goodwin there. I mean, it's clear what his views are, but despite trying to downplay his racist rhetoric, you know, in terms of who he considers British when he's taken to task, he's a lot more open when he isn't being questioned. This is what he said on Twitter at the end of last year. So Matt Goodwin initially tweeted and said, "A friend texts from abroad this morning. What has happened to your country? 3 words, mass uncontrolled immigration. That's what's happened." Mukhtar, big figure on Twitter. If you go back to the last graphic again. Here we go. Both of the suspects were born in the UK. Matt was jumping to conclusions as usual. And then Matt Goodwin says, so were all of the 7/7 bombers. It takes more than a piece of paper to make someone British. And then he says, Mukhtar comes back and says, just say that you have to be white to be British and move on. I mean, I think that there is clearly racist. I don't see how you can see it in any other way. And I hate to break it to Matt, but a piece of paper does make you British. I mean, if you have documentation to say that you are a British citizen, then you are British. I mean, does he think that I'm not British? I was born here. My parents were born here. You know, half my family are immigrants. What does he mean by that? Very strange. Now, Goodwin wasn't always on the radical right. In fact, when he was starting his career as an academic, he studied the far right and called out their politics. This is him on the BBC's The Big Questions on the 1st of April 2012.
Are the EDL, are they in a way changing the discourse in this country?
Well, they are a significant movement and they're representing concerns and grievances that are in society. I think on the other hand, probably lots of people who are watching the show may feel concerned about the way in which organisations like the English Defence League tend to have a lot of slippage in the way that they talk about Islam. So an organisation that started talking about militant Islamism now openly talks about Muslims in general. So let's just
talk about Islam again.
Well, okay, but let's just be absolutely clear.
We have to be very precise in our terminology.
Let's be absolutely
it's a sensitive issue.
Let's be absolutely clear. When we look at the survey evidence and we look at all of the research that's been done, the vast majority of Muslims in this country do not endorse terrorism or suicide bombing. The vast majority of Muslims in this country feel strongly attached to their country and their neighbourhood.
He's very different now, pushing the kind of politics he used to speak out against. Goodwin has had a dramatic shift, as documented by Hope Not Hate. Goodwin was once a serious academic working to understand the drivers of far-right extremism, and for most of his career, relatively liberal, seen by colleagues as hard-working, bright and ambitious. He produced several books and articles on the British National Party and the wider far right. He even sat on the government's anti-Muslim hatred working group and wrote impassioned articles for The Guardian denouncing Islamophobia and the warnings of far-right politics. Sadly, this has all changed, and in recent years, his rightward shift has seen him become a fully fledged radical right activist. Some have argued that Goodwin became radicalised after he went native or drank the Kool-Aid while studying UKIP for his 2 co-authored books, Revolt on the Right and UKIP Inside the Campaign to Redraw the Map of British Politics. The argument goes that his time with Nigel Farage and other prominent UKIP figures actually served to redraw Matthew Goodwin. But it's this paragraph that may be the best explanation on his right-wing shift. Yet there is another common thread that can't be traced from his earliest days in academia through to today, one that explains his seismic political shift better than anything else. After speaking with a range of former colleagues and academics who have worked with or known Goodwin over the years, there emerged one common point. From his earliest days in academia, he was ruthlessly ambitious, supposedly motivated more by personal advancement than a love or interest in the topic that he researched. So Goodwin is an academic. He should therefore know the importance of data, of facts, and research, yet he's allowed his racist politics to get in the way of it. He was exposed when I show this clip in a second, it's fantastic, but he was exposed by Mehdi Hasan for pushing false numbers about the number of social housing in London going to non-British residents.
You said on GB News, for example, and I quote, more than 50% of social housing in London is occupied by people who are not British. This is not acceptable. Well, forget not being acceptable. It's not true.
I think it's about that. I think it's about 47, 48%.
It's not, actually. The percentage of people who are not British in London social housing is about 14%. No. 85% of people are British citizens.
No, so my view would be, in terms of housing, we're in the middle of a housing crisis. I think we should have a principle of national preference in our housing market.
We do. 85% of people in London are British who are in social housing. No, you falsely said that more than 50% are not British. That's false.
No, across the country, more generally.
Across the country, it's 90% according to the Ministry of Housing.
When we were allocating social housing, we also used to take into account things like commitment to the community, looking after property, etc. We don't really do that anymore.
That's a fair point. That's not what you said, though. I just want to go with what you said, Matt, with respect. More than 50% of social housing in London is now occupied by people who are not British. That is not true.
I'd need to look at the statistics.
We have the statistics. According to London government,
I also wrote...
the figure in London is 84%. According to the 2021 census data, only 14% of Londoners living in social housing did not hold a UK passport. This has been pointed out to you for the last year.
No, it hasn't.
In fact, you went back on GB News and corrected it and said 48% go to people who are headed by people who are not born in Britain, which is a different point. But you would accept the vast majority of people in social housing are British.
I'd need to look at the data.
I've got the data.
No.
It's right
but
here.
The fact that 48... I think the 48...
Copied and pasted.
I think the fact that 48% of social housing in this country has gone to families that are headed by somebody who was not born in the country is a problem.
So that's a different argument, with respect.
Well,
and let's talk about that argument.
Well, let's have that.
No, let's have that argument. You were wrong on the first point.
I don't think I was wrong on the first point.
You're 100% wrong.
Well, I'd like to look at the data.
The Mayor of London, the census data.
I don't think the Mayor of London would be a credible source on that.
OK, so the London government... The London government don't know who the... All right, how about...
It's a highly political figure.
All right, how about the Ministry of Housing? 90% of social homes go to UK nationals. You're making some sweeping claims and they're wrong. You also said on right-wing channel GB News that I bet nobody knew this, but it's not a criminal offence to hire illegal immigrants in this country. That's not true either. You can be sent to jail for 5 years.
Now, despite Goodwin standing for reform and constantly telling people that we need to be more nationalist, especially when the conversation is around Palestine, Navarra's Aaron Bastani, quite frankly, embarrassed him on GB News when it comes to Israel.
I want a national unifying politics which puts Britain first, not Pakistan, not Gaza, not any foreign policy thing, Britain first.
Not Israel?
Well,
not Israel? The media's just been talking about Israel and the IDF for the last 4 or 5 days. That's what they talk about. You wouldn't think that high streets in this country are on the, are on the way down, or public services aren't doing well, or people are struggling with their bills. I hear so much about Israel.
Is that a fair point?
well, my personal view is Israel is a very close ally. Well, until recently, it was a very close ally of the United Kingdom. We should look after our allies. Unfortunately...
No, we shouldn't.
Unfortunately...
we should look after Britain.
Unfortunately, Israel no longer feels that we are a reliable ally, thanks to the Labour government. I care. And lots of British Jews, a lot of British Jews in the country care about that.
The point of politicians in the UK should be to look out for the UK. That's it. That's something, by the way, that the right always used to say. And I used to look at them as somebody on the left going, you know what, I think they've got a point. And large parts of the right, Matthew, have just gone away from that because they just keep on talking about Israel and Tel Aviv and the IDF. They're making the IDF a protected characteristic. You know, need to go to the human rights, watchdog and maybe protect for, IDF lance corporals because they're being discriminated against by the UK, media. It's silly. You had it right. You had it right 5-10 years ago. Look after this country.
It's not silly to say Israel has a right to self-determination and to protect its own people.
Every country does.
That Britain's, particularly British Jews, also feel profoundly unsafe about the direction of travel in this country.
So hold on. You started this by saying British politicians shouldn't be talking about other countries. I say ignore Israel. And then you say, no, actually, no, they should be talking about Israel. You need to make your mind up.
I'm not saying they should be talking about Israel. I'm saying I have less of an issue with them talking about countries that are our allies than people who are actively trying to organise politics along sectarian lines, which is what this independent group is going to do. Let's be frank, it's going to be pro-Gaza, anti-Israel, anti-British state, anti-military, pro-Palestine action. It's going to be all the things that this country should not really have.
Do you know, in the last Parliament, do you know what percentage of Tory MPs were members of Conservative Friends of Israel?
How many?
70%. Be friends of your own constituencies.
I don't really need to comment on that because Amber did a fantastic job. But I do love how these people talk about sectarian politics, but don't think that Israel is sectarian. Don't think that having a Labour Friends of Israel and Conservative Friends of Israel is sectarian. Wild stuff. Of course, though, we can't forget about this gem.
Matthew, we're going to hang on to you for just a second because you've become rather well known on social media for this tweet, which we can bring up onto the screen. 27th of May this year. I'm saying this out loud. I do not believe that Labour under Jeremy Corbyn will poll 38%. I will happily, in fact, eat my new Brexit book if they do. Now, your book is Brexit, Why Britain Voted to Leave the European Union. You are a man of your word, Matthew.
Well, indeed I am. I was surprised that Jeremy Corbyn added 2 percentage points or got 2 percentage points more than I had expected. And I did say that I would eat this book, which is available at all good bookstores. 2 percentage points makes a big difference. I am a man of my word. So what I'm going to do is just sit here and eat my book while you guys carry on. It's actually a hardback. There are lots of chemicals, but I've got to get through the whole thing, so...
Oh, it's just so awkward, isn't it? That guy wants to represent Gorton and Denton. He wants to be a Manchester MP. Wow. Now, the entire theory of Matt Goodwin is this idea of the new elites. He's not talking about the economic elite. He's not talking about the corporations or the billionaires. Rather, this new left-wing or liberal elite. He believes these people have taken over and replaced the old elite, including teachers, apparently.
And in this book, your account includes within that elite a midwife living in their overdraft or a Starbucks barista who happens to study at Russell Group University.
I don't think I mentioned those.
Which is unhelpful. No, because you say repeatedly that the thing that fundamentally composes this new elite, which is 25-30% of the country, is having gone to university.
Not just having gone to university.
That's the primary thing you say in terms of their identity.
Well, let's be clear about how I define the group.
Yeah.
They also tend to come from privileged families in the managerial and professional class. They tend to have gone not just to university, but to an elite Oxbridge, Russell Group University. They tend to have financial security and they tend to lean left on issues around culture. And I think a lot of people on the left have looked at this and said, well, I'm renting or I'm struggling to get by on a certain thing. Therefore, this new elite concept doesn't exist. And I think that's patently not true. I think there are lots of people out there that would meet the definition that I'm talking about. What was also true, though, which is an important point, is that there are lots of people today who will consciously move into low-paid, high-influence positions within society. And I think that's also something that, needs to be thought about and considered alongside the group that I'm talking about. Conservatives typically will not go into those occupations, right? They'll go into they'll make money. They'll try and make money. And so, yeah, absolutely. But this is partly the problem of contemporary conservatism,
right?
Power is. Which is, it's where one form of power is economic power, but there are other forms of power.
So if I'm a graduate charity worker in London on £25,000 a year and I'm in my overdraft and I can't afford to pay my rent, do I say to my landlord, oh, don't worry, I can't pay my rent, but I've read Bourdieu? I've read the complete works of Shakespeare.
You're not in the new elite. I mean, that person, in my mind, if they were in the new elite, would be from a family in the managerial professional classes, would be doing better financially, would be leaning left culturally, probably would be able to draw on considerable.
The elite is people who are doing well, and the people who are doing well are the elite. That isn't a massive insight, surely. No. Whereas what you're saying is the old elite had economic power, the new elite has political, social, and cultural power, and it fundamentally comes out of the university education. I'll quote you on this. The new elite are now so dominant in the world of politics that some scholars warn we have left the era of mass democracy, which characterised the 20th century, and instead a new dark age of diploma democracy, in which the system has been rewired to service the graduate class. You talk about the new elite and the graduate class interchangeably.
So that's basically Matt Goodwin's theory. He thinks that don't worry about the economic and political elite. Don't worry about the captains of industry. Don't worry about the CEOs and the multimillionaires who control workers. You need to worry about progressives. You think that a graduate going into a human rights organisation, a liberal think tank that earns little to no money, has more power over someone who actually controls our economy. In reality, what this basically means is, look, people become more progressive. Now, caveat here, the far right is emerging. People's opinions on a lot of stuff is getting quite reactionary. But overall, people are typically more progressive, and he can't handle that idea that people just simply disagree with him. Therefore, he has to come up with some crazy conspiratorial scenario that, actually, if you're a social progressive, that's not your view. That's a very top-down view pushed by this so-called new elite. If Matt Goodwin was around in the 70s and people became more and more accepting of same-sex marriage, he wouldn't be saying, okay, people clearly disagree with me on this. Oh, it must be this new elite taking over and they're pushing liberalism. I can tell you right now, that is utter crap. Now, of course, there is a liberal elite, but it's not the liberal that makes them elite. It's the elite that makes them elite. Again, by being a billionaire, a multimillionaire, a politician that serves the very wealthy, those that own capital and the means of production. That's what the elite has always been. And until we change the system, it will always be. Alexander, you're a Green Party member. Are you worried about Matt Goodwin's candidacy?
No, I'm not, to be honest. I think he's going to go down like a bucket of cold sick in Manchester. I was actually talking to my girlfriend about the by-election, wanting to go up because, I want to go support my friends. And her first reaction was, do you really think that you're going to go down well on the doorstep in Manchester? And I was, my first thought was, I am quite southern. Is that going to be authentic? I think Matt Goodwin just takes it to a whole nother level. It really is the best display of parachuting. I mean, I know that Reform, we all know Reform is not a democratic party. We know it's not a democratic movement. It's Nigel Farage's, it's Nigel Farage's show. And we know that GB News is their propaganda wing. That's where they develop their talent, and that's where they develop their voices. And it is patently obvious that the end goal of that is to get them into Parliament, and then they can still have their GB News show. I think for the Greens, like our strength is authentic grassroots campaigning and authentic local candidates, people who can speak to their communities. And while we have a first past the post system, I do think that that's really important. I think if we move to PR, I think we could have list candidates. I think we could have wider regional candidates and all that kind of stuff. But I think for the moment, while we're in first past the post, we do need to show people that we are authentic, that we do speak to their local concerns, that we are in touch with local issues, and we definitely do have a couple of really good local candidates. Hannah Spencer, I think she is going to be Reform's worst nightmare. Should she be selected? We got the selection coming up this week. After all, it is local members who, in Manchester City Green Party and Thameside Green Party who will be selecting the candidate. They will get to choose. I personally, I would choose Hannah Spencer, local to the area, local to Manchester, Greater Manchester councillor. She was our candidate for the mayor. An authentic, a working class woman, a plumber, plasterer by trade. I think she's going to be Reform's worst nightmare. She can speak to local concerns. But there are other good candidates. One you didn't mention was Faisal Reza Khan. He's on the national executive of the Green Party, and he's got quite an interesting story himself. I don't understand what could be going through their head, through Reform's head, in picking Matt Goodwin. I don't understand. It must be some hyper form of nepotism that they think that with all of that money they can make someone like Matt Goodwin appeal to the people of Gorton and Denton, and I think from a Green perspective, we have more experience campaigning in places like Gorton and Denton. It's a constituency of two halves put together by the Electoral Commission. You've got very different demographics in the different halves of it. But we've got two active local parties, and then to the south, Stockport Green Party as well. Very active, lots of new members. They're good at winning in these places. They're good at winning, in places with lots, lots of ethnic minority voters, Muslims, but also white working class areas as well as the well-to-do areas. We've got more practice here. We've got more game and more ground game. So absolutely, we can win it. I think after the gift of Labour blocking Andy Burnham, this is Reform's gift to us, and really it's going to be all about the ground game now, and how many people we can get out. I do wonder actually, is Reform going to put Matthew Goodwin on the doorsteps, and how is that? I can't envision that going well.
I would love to see that though. Going around the local doorsteps
absolutely.
and people saying,
"Look at the clips.
I can't afford."
Look at the clips he's already delivered to us. I'd forgotten about the paper in the mouth.
Oh, that's a classic.
Imagine him on the doorstep.
But I mean, though, like people are going to be like, "I'm really worried about paying my bills," or I can't afford. I mean, my weekly shop is increased. And he says, "Well, have you read my book on the new elites?" I mean, it's so out of touch. I mean, it doesn't mean he can't win.
I'd be surprised if he didn't ask them for their papers. I'm really worried about my bills. Yes, but are you British?
And that's not the message people want to hear on the doorstep. But
no,
but you never know.
People want to know that you're going to bring down their bills and that you've got actual policies which are going to bring down the bills, especially after Labour. Change, more of the same. People want to know that you have a plan